My name is Sarah, I'm 32 years old, and I'm a registered nurse who thought I understood my family dynamics until one humiliating weekend shattered every assumption I'd held about my place in our family hierarchy. What started as a simple visit from my cousin became the catalyst that exposed 20 years of systematic favoritism, financial manipulation, and emotional neglect that had been so carefully disguised as normal family functioning that I'd never questioned it. But what happened next changed everything, and if you've ever felt like the forgotten child in your own family, this story might help you recognize patterns you never knew existed. Growing up as the middle child between my older brother Marcus and younger sister Emma, I'd always been the responsible one, the peacekeeper, the one who never caused waves. My parents, Linda and Robert, seemed to appreciate this about me, or so I thought. I was the child who helped with household chores without being asked, who mediated between my siblings during arguments, who consistently brought home good grades and never got into trouble. Marcus, 3 years older, was the golden child, the star athlete, the charming one who could talk his way out of any situation, the one who received praise for efforts I had to work twice as hard to achieve. Emma, 5 years younger, was the baby, the creative one, the one who received endless patience and understanding for her artistic temperament and academic struggles. For years, I accepted this dynamic without question. I told myself that being the stable, reliable one was valuable, that my parents' quiet approval was worth more than the loud celebrations Marcus received for his achievements, or the gentle coddling Emma got when she struggled. I convinced myself that I was the mature one, the one who didn't need constant validation or attention. Looking back now, I realize how deeply I had internalized the message that my worth was tied to my usefulness, my ability to blend into the background and make everyone else's lives easier. The pattern became more apparent during major life events. When Marcus graduated high school, my parents threw a huge party, invited extended family, and gave him a brand new car. When I graduated with honors 2 years later, we went to dinner at a mid-range restaurant with just immediate family, and I received a nice watch that cost about 1/10 of what Marcus's car had cost. When Emma struggled with her grades in high school, my parents hired expensive tutors and provided constant emotional support. When I worked 3 jobs to put myself through nursing school, they occasionally asked how my studies were going but never offered financial help or seemed particularly invested in my academic success. The financial disparities were subtle but consistent. Marcus received help with his apartment deposit, car payments, and even credit card debt that he'd accumulated during his early 20s. Emma got her art supplies funded, her college application fees paid, and a monthly allowance throughout her undergraduate years. Meanwhile, I took out student loans, worked nights at a hospital while studying, and lived on ramen noodles and coffee for 4 years. When I mentioned the financial stress I was under, my parents would remind me that I was so good with money and so responsible that they knew I'd figure it out. They framed their lack of support as confidence in my abilities, but I was beginning to understand that it was actually a lack of concern for my struggles. The emotional patterns were even more telling. Marcus could call my parents in the middle of the night with his problems and receive immediate sympathy and advice. Emma could have emotional breakdowns and receive patient understanding and comfort. When I tried to share my struggles or frustrations, I was often met with practical solutions or gentle suggestions that I should handle things differently. My emotions were treated as problems to be solved rather than experiences to be validated. I learned to present only the positive aspects of my life to my family, to be the one who listened to everyone else's problems without burdening them with my own. This dynamic became particularly apparent during family gatherings. Marcus would regale everyone with stories of his latest adventures, his dating life, his career challenges and successes. Emma would share her artistic projects, her creative struggles, her dreams and aspirations. I would listen, ask supportive questions, and offer encouragement, but when the conversation turned to me, it was usually brief and surface level. My work as a nurse was appreciated in abstract terms, but no one seemed particularly interested in the details of my professional life, my career goals, or my personal experiences. I had become the family's emotional support system, but I wasn't truly seen as an individual with my own complex inner life. The cousin visit that changed everything happened last spring. My cousin Jake, who's 28 and works in tech, had been planning to visit our city for a work conference. He'd always been close to our family, particularly to Marcus, and my parents were excited about his visit. The conference was scheduled for a long weekend, and Jake would be staying from Thursday through Monday. My parents immediately began planning activities, restaurant reservations, and family gatherings to make his visit special. About 2 weeks before Jake's arrival, my mother called me to discuss the sleeping arrangements. She explained that Jake would be staying in our guest room, which was located in the basement of my parents' house. The room was comfortable enough, with a double bed, small desk, and private bathroom, but it was also where I typically stayed when I visited home. Since I lived in an apartment about 40 minutes away, I usually stayed over when we had family dinners or gatherings that ran late, or when I wanted to spend more time with my parents. My mother explained that since Jake was the guest and would be staying for several days, it would be more appropriate for him to have the private room. She suggested that I could sleep on the couch in the living room during the nights I planned to stay over that weekend. The couch was a sectional sofa that could accommodate someone sleeping, but it was in the main living area with no privacy, and the television and kitchen lights would make it difficult to sleep well. I felt a twinge of discomfort at the arrangement, but I didn't want to seem petty or unwelcoming to Jake, so I agreed. A few days later, I discovered something that completely shifted my understanding of the situation. I was having lunch with Emma, and she mentioned that Marcus had booked a hotel room for the weekend. She assumed it was because he wanted privacy with his girlfriend, but something about her casual comment made me probe deeper. When I asked her for more details, she revealed that my parents had actually offered to pay for Marcus's hotel room so he wouldn't have to deal with the disruption of having a houseguest. They'd presented it as a thoughtful gesture, acknowledging that Marcus valued his privacy and space. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My parents had enough concern for Marcus's comfort that they'd offered to pay for a hotel room, but they'd asked me to sleep on the couch. They'd prioritized Jake's comfort over mine, which was understandable, but they'd also prioritized Marcus's comfort over mine in a way that felt deeply unfair. Marcus, who lived only 20 minutes away from our parents' house, was being provided with a private hotel room at their expense. Meanwhile, I, who had been making the longer commute and staying over regularly for years, was being asked to sleep in the living room with no privacy or comfort. The financial implications were also striking. A decent hotel room in our area costs around $150 per night, so my parents were willing to spend potentially $450 to ensure Marcus's comfort, but they hadn't even considered offering me a similar arrangement. They hadn't asked if I'd prefer to book my own hotel room, hadn't offered to help with the cost, hadn't even acknowledged that sleeping on the couch might be uncomfortable or inconvenient for me. When I confronted my mother about the disparity, her response was dismissive and revealing. She explained that Marcus had a demanding job and needed proper rest, that he was dealing with stress at work and deserved to have a comfortable space to decompress. She said she knew I was more flexible and understanding, that I wouldn't mind sleeping on the couch for a few nights. She framed it as a compliment to my character, but I could hear the underlying message. Marcus's comfort mattered more than mine. His needs were more important. His convenience was worth spending money on while mine was not. The weekend of Jake's visit became a masterclass in observing family dynamics with new eyes. Marcus arrived at family gatherings fresh and relaxed from his comfortable hotel room, while I dealt with poor sleep and lack of privacy. My parents fussed over Jake's comfort, constantly checking if he needed anything, adjusting the thermostat, offering snacks and drinks. They showed similar attentiveness to Marcus, asking about his hotel room, making sure he had everything he needed. Meanwhile, I was treated as part of the household infrastructure, expected to help with meal preparation, cleanup, and general hosting duties without receiving the same level of care and attention. During one particularly telling moment, my father mentioned how nice it was that Marcus had thought to book a hotel room so he could be well rested for the family activities. My mother agreed, praising Marcus's wisdom in prioritizing his comfort. Neither of them seemed to recognize the irony of praising Marcus for doing something they'd prevented me from doing by not even offering it as an option. They were celebrating his decision to prioritize his own comfort while expecting me to sacrifice mine for the sake of family harmony. The breaking point came on Sunday morning. I'd slept poorly again, waking up early because of the morning light in the living room and the sound of my parents preparing breakfast in the adjacent kitchen. I was tired, uncomfortable, and increasingly resentful of the situation. When I joined the family for breakfast, everyone else seemed refreshed and cheerful. Jake thanked my parents for their hospitality, Marcus talked about how well he'd slept in his hotel room, and my parents beamed with satisfaction at being such good hosts. I realized I was watching a performance of family harmony that required my discomfort as a foundation. My willingness to sleep on the couch allowed everyone else to maintain their comfort and feel good about their generosity. My parents got to feel like gracious hosts, Jake got to feel welcomed and valued, and Marcus got to feel important and cared for. The only person whose comfort and dignity were sacrificed was me, and everyone seemed to take this for granted. That's when I decided to conduct a more systematic examination of my family's treatment patterns. Over the following weeks, I began documenting the differences in how my parents treated their 3 children. I looked at financial support, emotional validation, practical assistance, and general consideration. The patterns were undeniable and more extensive than I'd initially realized. Financially, the disparities were staggering. Over the past 5 years, my parents had provided Marcus with approximately $12,000 in direct support, car repairs, apartment deposits, debt assistance, and various other expenses. Emma had received about $8,000 in educational support, art supplies, and living expenses during college. I had received less than $1,000 in direct financial help, mostly in the form of birthday and Christmas gifts that were equivalent to what my siblings received. The emotional support differences were equally revealing. I started paying attention to phone calls, text messages, and general family communication. My parents initiated contact with Marcus about 3 times per week, usually to check on his well-being, offer advice, or simply chat. They contacted Emma about twice per week, often providing encouragement, discussing her projects, or offering emotional support. Their contact with me was primarily functional: logistics for family gatherings, updates about family members, or requests for my assistance with various matters. When I brought up these patterns with my parents, their responses were defensive and gaslighting. They claimed I was being overly sensitive, that I was imagining differences that didn't exist, that they loved all their children equally. They suggested I was jealous of my siblings' success, that I was creating problems where none existed. They turned my legitimate concerns into character flaws, implying that my observations were evidence of my own insecurity rather than their differential treatment. The most damaging response came from my mother, who suggested that I should be grateful for my independence and strength. She said she and my father had always known I was capable of handling challenges on my own, that they'd raised me to be self-sufficient and resilient. She framed their neglect as a compliment to my character, but I could finally see it for what it was: a convenient rationalization for their lack of investment in my well-being. The situation reached a crisis point during Emma's college graduation that fall. My parents had been planning an elaborate celebration, complete with a party, extended family gathering, and expensive gifts. They'd booked a nice restaurant, invited dozens of people, and were treating the event as a major milestone worthy of significant celebration. I was expected to attend, contribute to the party planning, and help with the coordination and execution. About a week before the graduation, I received a call from my mother asking if I could help with the party preparations. She needed me to pick up decorations, coordinate with the restaurant, and assist with various logistical details. As she outlined my responsibilities, I realized I was being asked to work as unpaid event staff for a celebration that would primarily benefit Emma and make my parents look like devoted supporters of their daughter's education. The final straw came when my mother mentioned that Marcus would be giving a speech at the party about Emma's achievements and their family's pride in her success. She asked if I could help Marcus prepare his remarks, providing him with specific memories and anecdotes that would make the speech more personal and meaningful. I was being asked to ghostwrite a tribute to my sister's achievements while receiving no recognition for my own contributions to the family or my own professional accomplishments. That's when I decided to establish boundaries that would protect my dignity and self-worth. I told my parents I would attend Emma's graduation ceremony, but would not be participating in the party planning or execution. I explained that I was happy to celebrate my sister's achievement, but would not serve as unpaid staff for an event that highlighted the very dynamics that had been harmful to me. I offered to take Emma out for a private celebration that would focus on her accomplishments without the family drama and performance. My parents' response was swift and revealing. They accused me of being selfish, of trying to ruin Emma's special day, of creating unnecessary drama during an important family milestone. They suggested I was jealous of Emma's success and was using the situation to get attention for myself. They completely dismissed my concerns about the family dynamics and instead focused on how my boundaries were inconvenient for them. The most telling moment came when my father called me to try to convince me to change my mind. He explained that they were counting on my help, that I was the most organized and capable person in the family, that they needed me to ensure the party would be successful. He was essentially admitting that they'd been taking advantage of my reliability and competence, but he framed it as a compliment and a request for help rather than acknowledging the pattern of exploitation. When I held firm with my boundaries, my parents' response escalated. They enlisted Marcus and Emma to pressure me, suggesting that I was being unreasonable and hurtful. Marcus called me to say he was disappointed in my behavior, that family should come first, that I was being petty and vindictive. Emma was more emotional, crying and saying she didn't understand why I was trying to ruin her graduation celebration. The irony was overwhelming. My family was upset that I wouldn't sacrifice my dignity and self-worth to make their lives easier, but they'd never been concerned about my comfort, my feelings, or my well-being when it inconvenienced them. They expected me to prioritize their needs over my own, but they'd never reciprocated that consideration. That's when I made the decision to share my perspective more broadly. I wrote a detailed letter to my extended family, explaining the patterns I'd observed and the reasons for my boundaries. I wasn't trying to create drama or get revenge. I was trying to protect myself from further manipulation and to ensure that my perspective was heard and understood. I sent the letter to my aunts, uncles, and cousins, including Jake, who had been present during the weekend that had opened my eyes to the family dynamics. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Several family members contacted me to say they'd noticed the differential treatment over the years, but hadn't known how to address it. My aunt revealed that she'd often felt uncomfortable watching my parents' interactions with their children, noticing how my contributions were taken for granted while my siblings were celebrated. My uncle shared that he'd wondered why I seemed to work so much harder than my siblings, but received less recognition and support. Most importantly, Jake responded with an apology and validation that completely vindicated my observations. He said he'd been uncomfortable during his visit, noticing how I'd been treated compared to Marcus and how my parents had seemed to take my accommodation for granted. He'd actually felt bad about displacing me from the guest room, but had been told by my parents that I preferred sleeping on the couch and was happy to help make his visit comfortable. The truth came out in waves over the following weeks. Multiple family members shared observations about the patterns they'd noticed, validating my experiences and confirming that the differential treatment had been visible to others. My cousin shared that my parents had explicitly asked him not to mention the hotel room arrangement to me, suggesting they knew it was unfair but didn't want to deal with my potential objections. Emma's graduation party proceeded without my participation, but the family dynamics had already shifted. Several relatives asked pointed questions about my absence, and my parents were forced to explain their family management style to a broader audience. The celebration that was supposed to highlight their devotion to Emma instead became a forum for examining their treatment of all their children. The vindication came in an unexpected form several months later. I'd been working on a research project at the hospital, and our team received recognition from the State Nursing Association for our innovative approach to patient care. The award came with a significant monetary prize and was featured in medical journals and local media. I'd been the lead researcher on the project, and my work was being celebrated in professional circles that my parents had never shown interest in understanding. When the news broke, my parents suddenly became intensely interested in my career and achievements. They called repeatedly, asking for details about the award, the recognition, and the media coverage. They wanted to share the news with their friends and extended family, to bask in the reflected glory of my success. They were proud of having raised such an accomplished daughter, but they'd never invested in understanding or supporting the work that had led to this recognition. The irony was profound. My parents wanted to celebrate my success and claim credit for my achievements, but they'd never provided the support, encouragement, or recognition that might have contributed to my accomplishments. They'd ignored my professional development for years, but they were eager to capitalize on my success once it became publicly visible and reflected well on them. I used this opportunity to establish clearer boundaries about how I wanted to be treated moving forward. I told my parents that I was willing to rebuild our relationship, but it would require them to acknowledge the patterns of differential treatment and make concrete changes in how they interacted with me. I wanted equal consideration for my needs and feelings, equal celebration of my achievements, and equal investment in my well-being. The response was mixed but ultimately revealing. My mother was more willing to engage with my feedback, acknowledging that she'd perhaps taken my reliability for granted and failed to recognize my needs. She seemed genuinely surprised by my observations and was open to changing her behavior. My father was more defensive, suggesting that I was being overly sensitive and that successful people shouldn't need constant validation. Marcus's response was perhaps the most disappointing. He was defensive and dismissive, suggesting that I was exaggerating the differential treatment and that I should be grateful for the independence I'd developed. He seemed threatened by my boundary setting and was unwilling to acknowledge how his privileged position within the family had been maintained at my expense. Emma's response was more complex and ultimately more promising. She was initially upset that I was disrupting family harmony, but she gradually began to recognize the patterns I'd described. She started noticing how differently our parents treated us and became more supportive of my boundary-setting efforts. She also began questioning some of the assumptions she'd made about her own position in the family. The healing process has been gradual and selective. I've maintained my boundaries while being open to genuine change and growth from my family members. My relationship with my mother has improved significantly as she's made concrete efforts to treat me with more consideration and respect. My relationship with Emma has actually grown stronger as she's developed more awareness of family dynamics and has become more supportive of my perspective. My relationship with my father remains strained, as he's been unwilling to acknowledge the patterns of differential treatment or make substantial changes in his behavior. My relationship with Marcus has deteriorated, as he's been defensive and dismissive of my concerns and seems threatened by my newfound willingness to advocate for myself. The most important change has been in my relationship with myself. I've learned to recognize my worth independent of my family's recognition, to prioritize my own comfort and well-being, and to refuse to sacrifice my dignity for the sake of family harmony. I've discovered that I don't need to earn love and respect through excessive accommodation and self-sacrifice. I've also learned that family dysfunction often masquerades as normal family dynamics, and that questioning these patterns requires courage and persistence. My experience has taught me that the family member who points out dysfunction is often blamed for creating problems, but speaking truth is necessary for healing and growth. Looking back on that weekend when I slept on the couch while my brother got a hotel room, I realize it was the catalyst I needed to recognize patterns that had been harming me for years. The experience forced me to examine my assumptions about my family and my place within it, and ultimately led to healthier relationships and better boundaries. If you're watching this and recognizing similar patterns in your own family, I want you to know that your observations are valid, your feelings matter, and your comfort and well-being are just as important as anyone else's. You don't have to accept differential treatment or sacrifice your dignity for the sake of family harmony. You deserve to be seen, heard, and valued for who you are, not just for what you can do for others. The journey toward healthier family relationships requires courage, persistence, and sometimes professional support. I worked with a therapist who helped me understand these dynamics and develop strategies for protecting my well-being while remaining open to genuine change from my family members. Therapy provided me with tools for recognizing manipulation, setting boundaries, and maintaining my sense of self-worth regardless of external validation. Creating change in family systems is challenging because it requires multiple people to acknowledge problems and commit to different behaviors. Some family members may be willing to grow and change, while others may be too threatened or defensive to engage in the process. Learning to accept these limitations while protecting yourself is an important part of the healing journey. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't require accepting ongoing mistreatment, and that love doesn't mean sacrificing your own well-being for someone else's comfort. Healthy relationships require mutual respect, consideration, and genuine care for each other's feelings and needs. These standards should apply to family relationships just as much as any other important relationship in your life. The experience has also taught me the importance of building chosen family and supportive community outside of blood relationships. I've cultivated friendships and professional relationships that provide the mutual support, celebration, and care that I wasn't receiving from my family. These relationships have been essential to my healing and growth. I want to encourage anyone who's experienced similar family dynamics to trust their observations and feelings. If you've noticed patterns of differential treatment, financial favoritism, or emotional neglect, those patterns are real and worth addressing. You don't have to accept harmful family dynamics just because they're familiar or because challenging them creates temporary discomfort. Setting boundaries with family members can be scary and difficult, but it's often necessary for protecting your mental health and self-worth. You have the right to be treated with respect and consideration, regardless of your family role or birth order. You deserve to have your achievements celebrated, your struggles acknowledged, and your comfort prioritized equally with other family members. If you're dealing with similar family dynamics, please know that you're not alone and that change is possible. It may require professional support, careful boundary setting, and sometimes difficult conversations, but you can create healthier relationships and protect your well-being. Your worth isn't determined by your family's recognition, and you deserve to be valued for who you are. Have you experienced differential treatment in your family? Have you noticed patterns of favoritism or emotional neglect that you're just beginning to recognize? Share your experiences in the comments below, and let's create a supportive community for people who are navigating complex family relationships and working toward healthier dynamics. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing and sharing it with others who might benefit from hearing about these experiences. Sometimes knowing that others have faced similar challenges and found ways to heal and grow can provide the encouragement and validation we need to begin our own journey toward healthier relationships and stronger self-worth. You deserve to be seen, heard, and valued, and I hope this story helps you recognize that truth in your own life.